All right, we are live, actually live. We tried this little thing where we were going through the OBS system, and we ended up going live on a different channel. It was
No,
still
it
my
was the
channel,
same channel, but it was a different live stream that just said Neil the 604
Neil's,
Atheist
yeah.
live stream.
Yeah,
So
we got to
like,
work out some
we were
bugs.
live talking to 6 other people for a few minutes.
So we gotta fix these bugs, and then we'll figure it out. But anyways, welcome everyone to another edition of, well, what I normally call deconversion stories. And technically this is a deconversion, but it's also like you switched over to a different belief system. So Aliakai is with me today. We've now been friends for quite some time now. I'd say at least over a year. And I've been on your show with the Bridges one.
Yeah, Xenia Bridge. The one I do with Jen Aldrich from Atheist Wind Down.
Yes, and that was a lot of fun. It was about building bridges in the communities, and which you just recently did a video on as well, the Anti-Theism one, about trying to get anti-theists to stop being such douchebags, and because some of them can be, absolutely, and you got to try to build the bridges rather than the separations.
Yeah, like, and again, we've had many discussions on this, but I generally, define anti-theism as the desire to eradicate religion because of this core belief that belief itself is somehow harmful, which is, again, how it's been argued to me by the majority of anti-theists that I've run into. So that's the definition I gave, versus anti-harm, which is specifically against harmful beliefs and practices that actually directly hurt people. And you and I have talked about how, like, for example, Reconstructionists, we have a tendency to be a lot more on the end of what you would talk about, quote unquote, rational. Like, we tend to be like non-evangelical in any way. We tend to keep our practices to ourselves. We tend to keep our religion within our own homes. And we also tend to abhor religious hegemony the same way that atheists do. So I proposed in that video, basically, hey, like, can you stop shooting pot shots at us constantly? Like, we can talk about beliefs in a respectful way, but like, don't tell me I'm delusional. That's a medical term. That's a whole ass problem. So that's what that video was about. That's
the wrong term, actually. Delusional is not the correct term.
Yeah.
But we'll get into that sort of thing in the after party. We'll talk a little bit about that because I've recently well, we'll talk about it in the after party. Anywho, what I usually do here is talk to people about their journeys, either from a belief system to becoming free of it or going into a different one. Because I myself was I'm not going to say polytheist. I don't know if I believed in multiples at the time, but well, to be honest, I don't know if I've really ever believed in deities of any kind myself. I sort of thought I did. So, but because it seemed to be the norm and I better, fit in with the norm. And anyways, I ended up being a Wiccan for a while until I figured out.
It sounded like you wanted to believe, but you kind of had a hard time actually doing it.
Right. I think I'm just far too much of a pragmatic skeptic. So it never caught. It never took. It did for a long time, and kind of enjoyed the culture behind it and the people behind it myself. So, which is why I still feel a kinship with people of that ilk as well, even to this day, which is why I'm friends with Ocean and Wolf, Wolf is in the chat, and Callan and you and many others. So, but I'm with you there. I'm for the building bridges stuff. And so why don't you sort of tell us your story about leaving one belief system for a different one?
Well, and what's interesting was I didn't quite leave one and, go to another so much as I left one and ended up in another one. Because there was a long period of time in there in which I was very close to what one could consider an agnostic atheist. I held that there probably were no gods, but I also held that there was no way to know. And then I had a personal experience, but we'll start at the beginning.
Okay.
In the beginning, I was a fundagelical, the best way to put it. My family went to a small, extremely evangelical church in Seattle once my mom got custody back of me, because there was a period of time that I can barely remember in which she did not have custody of me. My grandparents did. And like, what was interesting was my stepfather was fallen Catholic, but didn't really seem to believe anymore. My mom, on the other hand, was very into Christianity. And our church was one of those churches where, women are supposed to get married and it might not be the best idea to get an education. And, we couldn't even be missionaries. Yeah. And as a kid, I really desperately, like, when you talk about wanting to believe, I was very much there. I thought that if I threw myself wholly into studying the Bible and into studying, the church lessons. I was a little too smart for myself growing up. I annoyed I got moved up when I was like 8 or 9 up to the teenagers group because I was asking the Sunday school teachers really hard questions. Like, well, in the Bible, it says that like Cain went and married a woman for another tribe after he got kicked out. Like, who did he marry?
Yeah. Weren't they supposed to be the only ones?
Yeah. Or like, but wait, if they didn't know what good and evil were, how could like Adam and Eve know that like eating from the tree and not doing what God told you to is bad? Like, they didn't know they'd done something bad until after they did it. So like, how could making them die be fair? So, and
yeah, you got me.
And like that's something that drove my Sunday school teachers crazy. And so they were like, you know what, you are really freaking smart. We're gonna move you up to hang out with the teenagers, which was really awkward because like here's this little fucking 9-year-old hanging out with all these 13, 14, 15-year-olds that the church is trying to keep from snogging on each other, right? And like the deeper I got into it, like it even got to the point where this pastor that I had, and I'm not going to say his name for obvious reasons, but he actually like, I started going to his house at night and he never did anything to me, mind you. Like the moment I start saying I went to my pastor's house and did these things, it's like, no, nothing bad happened to me. Like as far as I know, that stuff didn't happen at the church, or if it did, I never heard about it. But he showed me these like really in-depth videos about like the Bible and biblical history, but also I don't remember who the video was from, but there was this creationism video where it was like, because I was learning about evolution in school, and it was like, well, evolution couldn't happen because the bombardier beetle. And I remember this segment like really, really strongly.
What?
Yeah, basically the idea was evolution couldn't be possible because this specific mix of chemicals has to come together in the beetle's butt, and like any slight off mix would kill it, and so it could not possibly have come to be naturally because this thing would have had to be created exactly the way it is. Right. And like I knew there was something wrong with that, but I didn't know what. And like, so my mom started enrolling me, like she started noticing that as badly as I was outwardly trying to like conform, and keep in mind, my mom was extremely abusive. Like this is just a part of my life. Like, I had a screwed up upbringing. She also noticed that I didn't seem as sincere in terms of like, I didn't really like going to church, and she noticed, little things about that and other things. And there was one day when I was in church camp when I want to say pretty close to 12, where we were watching that same video that my pastor had showed me, funnily enough, which is why I remember this segment so bloody well. And it was during that segment that I kind of stood up and I was like, I don't belong here. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't feel like I did. Like I didn't feel right. Sure. And so I got up and I went back to my cabin. And
I wouldn't either when they're telling you that the bombardier beetle disproves evolution. That's just nonsense.
Well, and I was obsessed with history. Like I was obsessed with paleontology and history. We had to do a report, like 3 of them. This is the way that they changed Washington's educational system. We had to do one when we were like 10. We had to do one when we were 13 or 14. We had to do another one during our senior year. And we got to pick the topic. We had to write like 10-page reports on a thing. And one of the things I decided to do was I wanted to write one on pelycosaurs because I thought that was fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Like these, therapsids in particular were just fascinating in general. And that brought me into contact with Stephen Jay Gould, who himself was a creationist, but his essays were so digestible and so easy to read. Like I started seeing evolution, and in my church, believing in evolution meant you didn't believe in God. It was very, as I said, fundagelical, very like creationist. And so, like that was part of what pulled me away. And that's part of the reason I don't understand why a lot of evangelical churches like cling to that hard creationism, like that hard, young earth creationism in particular, because like that's one of the number one things I've heard pulls people away. And it's definitely what pulled me away. But the other thing that kind of put the death knell in was I said I didn't belong there. Weirdly enough, I had a baptism performed and then an exorcism of a sort. No beating or anything was involved.
Whoa. An exorcism? Why would they even do that?
Because when I got up and I said I didn't belong there, they thought I was.
Okay.
So like I had this kind of imaginary friend, for lack of a better way to put it. It wasn't something I believed was real, but it was like I would have conversations with myself because I was kind of a lonely kid. And one of my friends had noticed me doing that. And she thought that I was possessed and that I was talking to something in my head. Mm-hmm. And so she went and like after I had gotten up and left, she told my like, I'm trying to remember what they called the cabin leaders. They were like cabin guides or something like that. It was path guides. That's what she told my path guide that she thought I was possessed. And so they baptized me, and I freaked out because I got put underwater and couldn't breathe, and I had PTSD from my stepdad being a douche. So, like, I freaked the fuck out when they baptized me, and they took that to mean that I was possessed. So I had, like, holy water sprinkled on me while the path guides and, like, the pastor were shouting, you know, like, that, you know, for the demon to reveal its name, and I was very confused. Yeah, that was a whole fucking thing.
Demon's name is Neil the 604 Atheist.
Apparently. Hey, Ocean's in the chat.
Yep.
So yeah, that was another really weird thing. And I was like, why is this happening? Like, I was talking to myself. I knew I was talking to myself. I didn't believe there was anybody else there. I told them that, and they're like, well, that's the kind of lie a demon would say. And I'm like, okay.
Of course, convenient.
You know, don't try to protect yourself, spawn of Satan. So like later on, after I said
my dad
that,
out of this.
like,
kidding.
I didn't really not want to not be able to go back to church camp because the person who reported me, ironically enough, was one of my best friends. She ended up dying a few years later, about a decade later, suicide because of part of the reason I fight the harm of religion is I lost my best friend to it, is the best way to put it. The purity culture in particular. And like, I often told the story over on the channel I used to work on, that one of the things that pulled me out of religion also was the book, The Egypt Game. Now, this is like a sort of tweens type novel. We read it in school. But the plot of it was there was this, like antique store. There was this antique store, and in the back of it, there was a bunch of Egyptian paraphernalia, and these kids like find it, they break into the back of it, like in this, it's like this covered patio area, and they like set up and they role play being Egyptians. And there's a whole lot of themes about like growing up and separation and other things in it. But one of the things that stood out to me the most was at one point they did like a prayer and a mock offering to, like, I think it was Horus, and they got their prayer answered. And what ended up happening to me was, like, I was sort of in this in-between phase where I'm like, I don't think I'm a Christian, but I'm not anything else either. And I prayed to that, and I got an answer next day, and I was like, well, shit. And then I panicked and tried to go back to Christianity for a bit, but I couldn't believe it.
Wait, hold on. When you say you got an answer, how did that answer come to fruition?
How
do you know that it was an answer?
Because what I asked for was, one of my friends had been telling me about tarot decks. And what had happened was I walked down the street and there was this garage sale, and I went to go look at it, and I found one on the table. And the person was a hardcore Christian and was like, I have no idea how that got here. Get it away from me. You can have it. It was just given to me.
Yeah, well, that's cool.
Which was freaky and weird, and I took it as an answer at the time. I had much more intense experiences later. But I took it as an answer at the time, freaked the ever-loving fuck out, hid it, and tried to go back to Christianity because I was scared to death I was going to go to hell. Because hell belief was one of the biggest parts of Christianity. Problem was, at that point, Kat was kind of out of the bag, and I just could not believe, and I thought there was something wrong with me. And I thought there was something wrong with me for a number of years. Until you get to high school. 14... I want to say I was a freshman. And like in choir, one of my friends was studying a book on Wicca. She let me borrow it. I brought it home. I started taking notes on it because it felt closer to what I had wanted out of something like the Egypt Game. But I thought that that sort of religion didn't exist in the world anymore. Like, I thought that, you know, I had wanted to go back to the old temples and other things, but that religion didn't exist in the world anymore. So I thought, okay, well, Wicca's as close as I'm ever going to get. Mm-hmm. Learn more and more about it. Start to sort of hand copy
my ring I bought when I was a Wiccan right there.
Mm-hmm.
There you go.
And, you know, I started studying the ever-loving hell out of it. And then my mom catches me, takes the book, and burns it. But she didn't have my notes. She also went through around that time and deleted a bunch of the fiction that I had been writing that I thought I had hidden well enough on the computer, because I didn't have a computer. We had a family laptop that was everybody's computer. And She found that, and she made me delete it. And she also made me feed pages of my handwritten fiction into the fire. So I got rebellious at that point, and I tried to be a practicing Wiccan. And by that, I mean, I tried to believe in that the same way I tried to believe in Christianity. I tried desperately for years. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't. Like, it didn't work for me either. There was something wrong. There was something missing. So after, I want to say about 4 or 5 years, maybe 6, it was around the age of 20, I want to say, I kind of sort of fell out of religion and decided that, well, if the gods existed, they sure as fuck weren't answering. They didn't care about me. And then eventually it was, the gods probably aren't real. Now, keep in mind that up until this point, I was not a fan of the Greek gods at all, ever, at any point in this. So
I love the mythologies.
I thought they were assholes. I thought the gods themselves were assholes.
Technically, they were.
I took a very Christian literalist perspective on looking at Greek mythology, and I was like, they're, idolaters, they're jerks, they're selfish, they're mean, they're like spiteful. There are all these things that like you get told from these things. Zeus is a predator, which I did a video on my channel about why that's not the case. But like, I went through a lot of that stuff. And like, I was kind of adrift for quite a while, basically as an agnostic atheist. Like after, I always say I was an agnostic for maybe 3 or 4 years because there was this intermediate period where I thought there was something and I was still trying, but at the same time I was like, if it is, it was almost like deism, like it doesn't give a fuck about me. It doesn't want anything to do with me. And, I even tried ceremonial magic at one point, like trying to find some sort of structure and order to it. And it just didn't work until one day I had my personal experience with Athena. And that's the ancient sort of Homeric way to pronounce Athena.
Did you see what Ocean put here?
Mythic literalism, the gods are dicks.
That's funny.
And I haven't disclosed details of this experience too much publicly. I've talked about it on my server a couple of times.
Okay.
But what happened was I got out of a float tank. I was halfway to a shower and I got struck, for lack of a better way to put it, with a vision. And the overwhelming feeling that I got, I've tried to describe it as awe, but it's the kind of awe that you feel like, say, out in Utah when you're staring up at the sky and you see the sheer number of stars for the first time and you realize how fucking tiny you are. Or you're standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and you realize how big it is and how ancient it is and how insignificant you are staring down it on the lip to that like huge passage of history that you're witnessing, times 1,000. Like just this incredible, overwhelming presence. And I came out of it basically unable to speak, knowing 2 things. It wasn't like a voice in my head telling me things. I just knew them, for lack of a better way to put it. Number 1, that it was Athena that I had seen. And number 2, that I was to construct a shrine and to begin making offerings. I knew how to do neither of these things. I knew nothing about Hellenism. I knew nothing about Athena, to be honest, other than the fact that I thought she was an asshole like all the other Greek gods. I was mad. I was so fucking mad. So the first thing I did after finishing my shower and when I eventually got my ability to speak back was call up my doctor and get referrals back to the specialist that I'd been seeing prior for migraines, and a cardiologist when they had thought that I had had a stroke at one point and they couldn't find any evidence of it. And I was like, I need to get myself checked. And when I went to go see my psychiatrist within a couple weeks as well, because I have ADHD, this is a thing that I see regularly. I have to see her every 3 months because of the laws regarding like getting Adderall and stuff. I talked to her. Nothing wrong with me at all. No signs of anything. Because I was worried that it was a cardiac event. Like I was worried that my loss of my ability to speak for a little while afterwards meant that I had had a stroke. Like I had actually had one, and that I had been misdiagnosed with it, with not having had one before, or that it was a migraine or something like that. Nope, no fucking signs of anything at all.
Right. So they couldn't find out the neurological link to why you were able to.
Nope, nothing.
Not speak.
Yeah.
Well, there had to be something. They just couldn't find it.
I got a clean bill of health from everybody. Nothing wrong with my blood tests. Like they tested me for diabetes. They tested me for a lot of shit. Like I can't even remember half the stuff that it was. Like there were blood things, there were scans, there was a lot of stuff. And like, I basically didn't fit any of the like delusional disorders or schizoaffective or anything like that. Like we went through the whole thing and she's like, you're normal. You just had an experience that you can't explain.
Well, having something like that happen doesn't mean you're abnormal. People experience stuff like that all the time. But
So,
nowadays, like recently, nowadays in neuroscience, they now know multiple ways where things like that can happen.
well, and what ended up
It's
happening
one of the
was
things
I started.
I'm in class with right now. Actually, I'm studying a bit of that, like online stuff.
I started researching after that angrily. Again, this was over 6 months of me being pissed. And this is where, like, I've dealt with a lot of anti-theists who are like, oh, you didn't look at it rationally, you didn't look at it critically. Like, bullshit, I didn't want to believe. And I especially didn't want to believe in those gods. Like, and that's exactly the way I would have put it back then. Like, if my partners were home, you would have heard one of them shouting down the room of, oh yeah, we didn't hear the end of it, because I was pissed. But I started researching how to worship the Greek gods, like how that would be done. How does one make an offering? And I stumbled across several blogs that sort of started leading me down the path toward Hellenism, which felt like coming home, which made me even angrier. Like, it really did. I was mad that I had finally found something that fit, because I didn't want to be religious anymore. And yet there was this thing that I not only couldn't explain, but nobody else could, that had happened, and this knowledge that I'd been left with, and this overwhelming experience that I had been left with. And so I started making offerings. I started worshiping the Greek gods after having researched it. I gave in after several months of trying to get away from it. And it was like everything in my life fell into place. Suddenly opportunities that I had never seen opened up in my career. Like, my entire life fucking changed. And I don't know how to describe it beyond that, apart from there were so many coincidences stacked on top of each other that any pattern recognizing hominid would recognize what it was. But, like, the other crazy thing was 2 or 3 years after this, I joined this community and I went into Ocean's Discord server. And we were having a discussion about UPG, which he did an excellent video on. Like unverified personal gnosis, it's experiences like mine. And what was crazy about the experience with Athena is I had never been exposed to images that looked like she did in that instance. She was wearing armor and clothing and such that I had never seen on any image of her, and yet I knew it was her. And so, like, I was talking to the Discord server about this, and it turned out there were a couple of military buffs in the chat that night. And they started going through and posting things. And I still had my sketches and my written record of this happening, because I kept a journal, and I kept a journal after my floats for anything interesting that happened during them. And so I had these sketches of this armor, and it turned out to be a specific Athenian military garb from the Peloponnesian War. Mm-hmm. And the cloak she was wearing, the color of it, which normally when she's depicted, she's wearing a red cloak or nothing at all. It was this specific shade of blue. Turned out that specific shade of blue actually had significance to the Athenian military as well. And I had never been exposed to these concepts at all. I'd never seen these images of any warrior that looked like this before. And yet it had that historical backing, and it matched my sketches, and it matched what I remembered so vividly from that experience. So that was this weird, crazy conclusion, and it sort of ended up committing me to full-blown reconstruction rather than just kind of trying to worship the gods in a semi-eclectic way, which is kind of what eventually led me to starting my YouTube channel after, things changed with my situation here on YouTube. I've been doing educational stuff for Hellenist people or people who are interested within Hellenism to kind of teach people what we believe and what a reconstructed Athenian worship would look like in the modern day. Mm-hmm. But my main work on the channel is also kind of debunking a lot of myths around paganism and building bridges between pagans and atheists, because my weekly live show, Xenia Bridge, that's the whole shtick of that show is, hey, let's be friends. And I've even had a heretical Christian on 2 weeks ago. My friend Maddie, Science Side Up, came on to have a chat about her beliefs. And, why, for example, she's a climate scientist and not a climate denier.
Okay. That's good. Need more like her.
Yeah. And she's a science communicator. That's what her channel is primarily about. But we ended up talking about Christian purity culture and how damaging it is.
Right.
So that's kind of that. Being part of this community has helped in a lot of ways, I think. It's helped both with solidifying my commitment to my own faith Like it's definitely deepened it, but also kind of being exposed to such a wide myriad of worldviews. I didn't realize there were so many people that had such a diverse like set of views. I didn't realize that there were people who practiced the ancient religions, and I also didn't realize that there were so many atheists who are willing to talk to us, for example. Like, because when people find out that I'm a pagan here, like I get either ambivalence or anger, one or the other. I would say probably the hardest part about deconverting, though, was fear of hell. Like, even when I was trying to be a Wiccan, that's the
I
thing
hear
that
that
would
a
keep me up
lot.
at night.
I hear that a lot.
It was, I had nightmares about it. I would freak out. I would wonder if I still believed that at least that part was true, and if there was just something wrong with me that I couldn't believe in Jesus or the Bible. The other really hard thing was getting "in Jesus' name I pray" out of verse. Like when I was trying to be Wiccan, like I had this instinct in my head, even when I didn't verbally say it, to say it.
Right. See, I never had that instinct myself, but I was raised Jewish, so
Yeah.
in Judaism, there's no Christ.
But I mean, I don't know, I guess, what more to go into apart from that's kind of the incredibly bumpy road that I took to becoming a Hellenic polytheist in particular. But I think there were a lot of little things early on within the Christian faith itself that kind of tiptoed me out of it, at the very least, rather than into something else. The big one was the evolution thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there were a lot of smaller ones. Like the role that women
You can't
played.
really deny evolution anyways. The amount of evidence for it is overwhelming.
Yeah, it's incredible.
It's not in question.
Like when I started college, I wanted to be a paleontologist. Like that's what my first major was. I'm a total paleontology geek. I've actually done a dig as part of one of the geology courses that I took, where we, as sort of a final project, went driving as a class through like a good chunk of Washington and went fossil hunting, like to go see different deposits of fossils and rocks and other things, and got to see one of the coolest ones is just off of the road in Issaquah, which is like pretty close to the mountains, like it's in the valley.
I know where it is.
There's this deposit there where the Yellowstone hotspot and the I'm trying to remember, it's where the Pacific plate is colliding with the microplate that is currently being subducted underneath it. It's when that collision that formed the Cascade Mountains basically crossed over the Yellowstone hotspot and caused this, like, you know, several thousand year long eruption of silicate material to happen forever. And you can find these fossils of extremely fine ash that's been compressed, of like trace fossils of everything from bugs to leaves to like fish bones to all kinds of stuff. And it's just right there off the road in Issaquah. And I have like a whole box full of fossils that I got from that. But like, even as a Hellenist, I don't in any way deny evolution, like at all. I don't deny like any part of science, to be honest. Like, I think that science is a useful tool, and I think it's sacred.
Sacred? It doesn't really, I don't think it falls into the category. Science is a method we use to understand, like I was saying before, the natural world around us and the universe and stuff like that. You're right. It's a tool that we use. I use probably 25 different methods every single day when I go to work in my lab. So,
well, the desire to, like, the reason that I call it sacred within my own tradition is the desire to understand our world, to exercise reason, is itself considered to be a sacred thing. That's the thing we share with the gods. Like, science is not a thing that most Hellenists would deny, because it's built into our faith as being something precious.
Okay. Fair enough. But yeah, I mean, myself being a hack scientist, as a chemist mostly, but I'm working on learning some other stuff outside of organic chemistry, like brain chemistry and stuff like that, which is why I'm taking the courses on neuroscience and stuff like that. So
neurochemistry is fascinating and so incomplete. Like, the brain is such an interconnected system that it is so hard to isolate anything.
We've done, from what I've learned now that I didn't even know like 3.5 weeks ago, the stuff we know now is head over heels what we knew 6 months ago. Like, we learn more shit all the time. Like, things we know now for sure. You cannot trust your memories. Even our experiences can be way bad, way wrong. All kinds of stuff. Like, things, our brain is geared through evolution to play tricks on us, literally. So I'm learning this stuff and listening to the audio tracks and doing the testing and stuff like that, and the learning stuff. And my mind is just fucking blown by the shit that I was like, holy crap. I don't trust myself anymore. I don't trust the way I think. I don't trust all kinds of shit. It's nuts how all the stuff that they've discovered about the human brain and how it works.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've talked repeatedly before that, like, memory itself is an active reconstruction and reimagining of the event because the neurons fire together and it can be changed. Most
of it is false. Keep that in mind.
Yeah, well, this is part of the reason why, like, I knew this even from a young age. I took fucking, like, AP psychology when I was 16. It's part of the reason I keep a journal, because when memories are freshest is the time that they're most accurate.
By the way, my apologies, Ashleigh, but that is not correct. Not at all.
Otangelo, I disagree.
He doesn't know anything about chemistry, so why would we listen to him?
Yeah, Otangelo, I disagree with you as well. Like, being a pagan who believes that your God could possibly be real, he's just a dick. Like, I disagree with you.
I see stuff like that, and I go, this guy clearly knows nothing about chemistry.
Well, I'm agnostic on whether or not the gods created the universe as well. Like, this is a thing that, gets me into trouble, with a lot of different people. Like, I don't know if
why does the universe have to be created?
That's what I don't understand. Like, the gods could have come into being with the universe, and that would make them no different, in my opinion.
Oh, hi, India. India's here. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. There's a lot of reasonable hypotheses about the start of the universe, the one that we currently exist in. There are now a lot of scientists are leaning towards multiverse theory.
Well, yeah, especially because there appear to be these gravitational forces that don't exist within the universe itself that were exerted on the earliest parts of the universe that we can observe currently that we can't explain with any body that could exist in the universe at that time, which is fascinating to me. Like, I find astronomy in particular so fascinating.
Astronomy is unbelievable. And no, Otangelo, neurons are not computers. Sorry. Computers,
like, the brain is too radically different from the way computers work. Like, I had this debate in my server a while back. The brain is too radically different from the way that computers work. It is a whole heap of signals and chemicals and, like, interconnectedness, and the way that neurons function. Like, we are still learning so much about the interplay between neurochemical messengers and, like, the actual firing of neurons themselves, and the way that they can repair themselves, and the way that the brain, like, works around its own deficiencies. Like, it is so incredibly fascinating. And also the role that neurons, like, that nerves in general within the whole wider body play. Like, we're discovering more and more how, like, a lot of, for example, our neurochemicals can be produced within the gut, and, like, what the role that plays. And that's also fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Like, our, like, gut intestinal flora, I will put it to you this way. An all meat diet is going to fuck up your thinking. Like, just saying. Your intestinal flora are fed by fiber. You need it.
We also have taste buds elsewhere in our bodies other than just our tongue.
Yeah, I like to remind
the same
people.
Way,
I like to remind people that the reason your butt burns is because there are taste buds there.
Mm-hmm. That's right. So when you eat that spicy food, you get to taste it all over again.
But as far as certain things go, I don't think that religion should ever be an excuse to deny science. Like, this is part of the reason that I tend to fight, woo peddlers within my own traditions, like within my own community. I also don't think that belief in gods necessarily is anti-science either. I think that it depends on what you believe about the gods and what you believe about the world, and whether or not you let that belief get in the way of scientific advancement.
Well, beliefs in deities, etc., has nothing to do with science. It's a completely different thing. So the two can be completely separate. Now, if you're going to come to a scientist and say, hey, listen, I know that this such and such God is real, the scientists say, okay, well, let's test that out. And every time something like that has come to the table, using the current methods that we do have, because we have no way to test the supernatural. We just don't, because it's not natural. So we don't have the way to test the supernatural. And until we do, that's sort of something that most of the sciences push aside.
I mean, supernatural is kind of a weasel word in the first place.
Okay, outside of nature, outside of the natural realm that we know and can interact with, etc. We have no way to test anything outside of that. So we don't bother with it until there's something comes up and demonstrates itself to be something that we can test. And every time people bring things to the table, like psychics or astrology or whatever, anything in that realm, we'll say, it fails every single time. Every single time.
Well, and again, like when you try to test whether or not the gods exist, you're basically taking away their agency to some degree. You're assuming that a god is going to be like a switch that you can pull a lever and get the same result every time. But I mean, we can't even do that with people to some degree, right? Like you can't force the same person to do the same thing over and over and over again, because like if our neurochemistry is complex enough that we can't even fully explain all the irrational things that people do, which to some degree we can't, like that's, yeah. Like, to some degree, we can't. That's the entire challenge of psychology, is you'd think there are so many things that are very clearly in a human being's best interest. Why don't we act that way? Well, we have some explanations, but, like, psychology is also going through a replicability crisis because of the fact that so many of our foundational, like, experiments couldn't be reproduced when somebody actually tried to go do it. So, like, even trying to learn what makes us tick is a fuck-up challenge. What makes you think you could understand something that's potentially so much bigger than us and could get it to do the exact same thing over and over on a command? That, it doesn't make sense. Like, trying to test the gods scientifically doesn't make sense. But it also doesn't make sense to try to explain scientific phenomena with the gods.
You're right. It doesn't. Because, like I said, they're two separate sort of things. And Otangelo says you can't test materialism. Materialism, why? I don't even understand that. This guy's talking nonsense now.
I mean, if you're talking about philosophical materialism, like, hey, I only believe in what I can physically interact with and see. I mean, that's a rational philosophical position.
And that can be tested as well.
It's a difficult philosophical position to hold because of the brain in the vat problem, but it is technically a rational philosophical position to try to hold.
Brain in the vat problem is a cop-out bullshit thing. I hate that.
It's still a problem, though.
It's not a problem. It's not at all a problem, because we're not brains in a vat. I think that somebody came up with this idea, and it's like, why do you need to do that? You're talking, you're importing in like solipsism.
Cafe, I still am a polytheist. I worship the Greek gods. I always have, or at least since I've been in the community. Like, I just talked about my path to getting there. Yes. But, like, again, just because I worship the Greek gods does not mean that I don't believe in science.
That's right. That's right. Hey, the Greeks were one of the first to start up with the whole science thing anyways.
Yeah, a lot of
ways to come up with methods for it, for sure.
Yeah, and a lot of, like, the early math that cannot be attributed to the Muslim Renaissance or the Ottoman Renaissance, which a lot of people really ignore the massive advancements in mathematics that were given during that time. But when Europe was in the Dark Ages, the Middle East was flourishing, and there were some really interesting, like, mathematical advancements that came out of that. But, like, some of the most sophisticated astronomical calculations that were done in history were done by the Aztecs. Like, their calendars are still incredibly, insanely accurate, as were the Mayan calendars.
That'd be adorable. Young Frankenstein.
Like, you might disagree with some of the religious reasons for them doing it, but in terms of pinpointing and tracking stars and such, and star charts and the movement of the planet and the passage of time, the Aztecs and the Mayans were insane. Yeah,
but, I mean, Greeks were doing it too. The Greeks were the ones that figured out the Earth was round, a sphere. And they actually were able to measure it almost to, like, within something like a couple of feet, which is amazing for back then.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things. People assume that our ancestors were dumber than us. They weren't. They just didn't know as many things. Like, we are standing on the shoulders of thousands upon thousands of years of collected, passed on human knowledge. And that's one of the things that makes us unique as a species. Like, one of the things we can do is transfer knowledge from one generation to another. Yeah. I mean, language and reason are our greatest gifts. Honestly, and as a cooperative species, that is fascinating.
Well, we are social, so it's beneficial to be cooperative than as we've seen in much of our history, to be against each other. We just end up wiping each other out, and it's all over ridiculous things like beliefs and land and power and all kinds of stupid things like that. Humans, what are you going to do, right?
Well, and there's some interesting things being said in the chat. I have
yeah.
done more research into what the Greeks did and did not believe, Cafe, than you probably have in your lifetime. Like, I have something like 40 or 50 books sitting in my room alone, let alone the ones that are down in the temple room and the ones on my Amazon wish list on top of it. Like, in terms of what scholars understand about the Greeks, I'm getting pretty deep into it. The philosophers were not in agreement with Plato about everything all the time. And I will put it to you that way.
Oh, sure. Oh, I know that. There's some talk now that was it
also
Plato?
If you're talking about the one, then like in those terms, then you probably don't understand what the one is. Having like dived pretty deeply into Platonism as of late, because I am not a big fan of it. You get the concept of a quint omni god out of there, and there are other interesting things about it. I disagree with Platonists on a lot of things, but yeah, I think we're going to start getting into debates too much if I pay too much attention to the chat. So do you have like any questions, I guess, about kind of my coming out story, or about sort of what led me here and personal experiences and things? Because I feel like I've covered as much as I can think to cover on my own.
Okay. I think I kind of wanted to know, like, what was you say you had an experience. Was it just the one that started you down that track, or did it end up being kind of a handful of them that you were like, okay, this happened, then this happened, then this happened, so now I'm down this path, that kind of thing?
It was kind of a handful of them. This one experience set me down that path. And afterwards, like after I started practicing, a number of like additional experiences, much more minor than that one, though I had another one with a different set of gods recently that I also couldn't explain. That was crazy. Again, talked about it on my Discord server, but this was with one of the Kemetic gods that like also was a bunch of information I had never been exposed to that I was shown. And then when we did research, we were able to line up not only the time period and location that I was in, but also the specific information that I was given. We were able to line up with history, which was crazy. And this is like pre-human civilization type history. This was like I was shown the evolution of a certain segment of civilization in a specific spot. And we were able to confirm that the buildings and such that I was shown in that dream were like architecturally basically identical to the ones that they had been excavating in a certain area, which was crazy. But I've had a number of experiences that kind of kept me on the path after I got started on it by that larger one. And unlike the other two attempts, like Christianity and Wicca, I do believe in my gods. I can't say I know, like I can't claim certainty, but it wasn't trying
belief and knowledge are different, right?
Yeah. Episteme and doxa in Greek.
Yep.
But like I am confident that it is rational for me to believe, and I do genuinely believe, and I have such positive experiences with continuing this practice and continuing this belief and building the knowledge that I have, that I don't see any reason to stop, and I don't see anything that has convinced me that it is not true. But I also don't believe that the gods require everybody to worship them, and it doesn't seem to me that they want a relationship with everybody. Like, it seems that there are some people they're interested in and others they're not, and I don't know why. But that just seems to be what the evidence shows, at least as far as like my interactions with the community. I don't know if that makes any sense. I don't think that some people are more special than others. Like, I think it's no different from like why you would want to be friends with one person versus another. Like, you can't necessarily explain it. You can try to, but you're kind of post hoc rationalizing a feeling you already have. And it seems to be the same with the gods. Like, we can try to put together the things that unite the people they're interested in, or the people that have experiences with them. But like my experience, I can't explain why that happened. Like, I can't explain why it was specifically her, why it was information I've never been exposed to, why it happened when it did. Like, I went through all of the stuff I possibly could to disprove it. I don't know.
Well, you don't have to. I mean, if you're happy with what you are, with what, because this is who you are, right? So if you're happy with it, then you don't need to change until something happens that changes your mind. Right? We don't choose to believe things. You're either convinced of something or you're not. And sometimes people have experiences that convince them of something. So they end up going down that path.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. And like I said, never in a million years would I have predicted that I would be sitting here as a Hellenist. Like, again, I hated the fucking Greek gods. I was so mad, so mad. Like,
Why?
The guy still tells stories about how mad I was. Again, if my partner was in the chat, he would be like, yeah, like, seriously, I didn't hear the end of it. My boarder will tell you that he couldn't hear the fucking end of it. Nobody did. Nobody who knew me at the time. I was so fucking mad. And it sounds funny now, like it's hilarious, but at the time it was serious business. I was so pissed.
I bet. Is there anything you said before you kind of got into the polytheism thing that you considered yourself to be an agnostic atheist? Mm-hmm. What led you to that?
It was the fact that no matter what I practiced or tried to believe or did, I never felt the connection that I was told I was supposed to feel.
Okay.
Like, I came to the conclusion that if the gods existed, they didn't give a fuck about me. And then eventually that they couldn't possibly exist because way too much science. Like, and by way too much science, I mean, again, you know what I majored in. Like, I started with paleontology and eventually ended up in nutrition with a minor in, abnormal psychology. And I didn't finish the degree. I've talked at length about why. They're, like, before. It was a whole fucking heaping mess. But I got enough in that I came to the conclusion that there couldn't be anything, or that if there could, it would not be something that we could understand or interact with in any way. So again, it was like an agnostic sort of, I don't think it's possible to know, but I'm pretty damn sure it doesn't exist.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the stories that we have, even biblical, we're talking about a deity, because although I hate the term Judeo-Christian because Jews and Christians don't believe the same thing. Although they do share common threads with the Old Testament. That's what I grew up with, being raised a Jew, right? And where was I going with this? It's just that I can't even think of where the hell I was going with this now. I threw myself off my own train. I derailed my own thoughts, which happens from time to time.
I'm not done with you yet.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember growing up and hearing. I mean, let's face it. There have been hundreds of thousands of deities proposed all throughout human history, right back to the Neolithic times. I mean, the first little carvings, I guess you could say, you saw the large-breasted pregnant women stones that used to come up. Those I think were. So no, I haven't had my gummies, Jen. So that's not the reason.
Rory, that's the kind of generalized phrasing that I used for. I specifically was researching things like panic disorders, anxiety spectrum disorders, and eating disorders, because what I wanted to specialize in was one-to-one practice with eating disorder patients. In part because I had one that wasn't diagnosed yet at the time, but in part because I have now, dealt with like nutritionists who didn't understand eating disorders worth the damn and would give like dieting advice to bulimics who were overweight, which would of course make the disorder worse. So I wanted to be better than that.
You sound like a Hollywood actress, Aliakai.
I do.
Apparently.
Yeah, usually I get told I sound like a little boy, so I guess that's an improvement.
A little boy? How the hell could that ever be?
I don't know. I have been told that I sound like a little boy who hasn't quite gotten through puberty yet.
Oh wow.
Yeah, I hate
I never would have thought that myself at all. So anyway, I think where I was going was people always, the fact that there have been so many deities proposed in human history. How do we as a species, because I mean, there's a lot of stuff behind all of this, but how do we as a species end up deciding which ones are the right ones, which ones are true, which ones are real?
Well, I personally don't see much of an issue in, for example, say the heathen gods being real, the Aztec gods being real, the Greek gods being real. I don't think there has to be one set of beliefs that is absolutely true. I think that the gods could have taken particular interest in different cultures. I think that if a concept of a deity is coherent, meaning, for example, the Christian God being singular, omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and a concept of evil actually existing.
Which can't actually, that can't happen. That can't exist.
That's logically incoherent to the point where the deity, if it exists, doesn't exist as that. And I feel like we can prune out those types of things. But beyond that, like, I am willing to accept that deities from other cultures exist. I just don't engage in praxis with them. And I think that that's the difference between the polytheist and monotheist mindsets. You know, like Ocean and I have talked extensively. Like, I believe his gods very well could exist, but I don't worship them.
Sure. Sure, and no offense to Ocean, but I don't believe in any of them. So, but he knows that anyways.
But I think that neither of us takes offense to that. Like, I think it's perfectly rational for you to not believe. I've told this to Jen and Russ and many other atheist friends. I am fine with the fact that you don't believe. And I won't try to use my personal experience or anything else to make you, because I have no interest in that. If the gods want to build a relationship with you, they sure as fuck don't need me in the way. Like, they don't need me to evangelize for them. They have a tendency to call people that they're interested in. So if a God gets interested in you and you hear that call, it might happen someday. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Like, that's not up for me to do.
Damn it. I tried not to. I love Ocean. He's awesome.
But I can't speak for any other polytheists, but I haven't met one that would ever try to force another person to believe in our gods. And if they do, then they tend to get kicked out of the polytheist community.
Yeah, no kidding. And Tangelo, that was something that you would actually have to demonstrate. People don't take your word for it just because you say so. Because the Bible is full of bullshit. Like, it's full of stuff that is just not possible. The Genesis account is not possible. An omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, omnibenevolent being cannot exist. That is like an oxymoron or something. And you've got a God that is both just and infinitely merciful. So I've been told. That's also not possible. You can't be just and infinitely merciful. They can't coexist. So this deity of yours, you got to do better if you're going to try to convince people that this one's real, because I don't buy it at all.
Well, and I think this will be an interesting discussion for the after party, but we've got the reclassification of gods into demons, which, by the way, if you guys go check out my channel, I actually did a video on how demons don't actually exist in the Old Testament and how the word demon was a mistranslation of a concept between two different cultures. If you actually watch the video before you say anything, Neil, you have to watch it.
I know, but okay.
But what I talk about the various types of quote unquote demon, like other supernatural beings. But the concept of a demon as a thing came into being when the Septuagint was created, or the Septuagint. It had to do with translating a set of particular words into the word daimon, which within Greek culture meant a supernatural force acting, whether it was a god or a spirit or something like in somebody's life that you couldn't identify. And it also was identified with the spirits of deceased heroes by Hesiod, and that translation between those two cultures came to mean something evil when you combined it with certain aspects of Platonism, like specifically certain aspects of Neoplatonism. So I go over the history of that and what those various beings within the Old Testament and what those words meant, like what they actually were. Though I'm mad at Premiere because in that video, before I found out how to fix it, it reversed all of the Hebrew words. Like, even when I typed them into another thing and copied and pasted them, it flipped them so that they read left to right instead of right to left, which pissed me off. And I've had so many of people who read Hebrew tell me that in the comment section. And I'm like, read the description and the pinned comment. It was Premiere.
I read Hebrew. I lived in Israel for over 2 years. I was taught Hebrew from fucking 4 years old and up.
Well, and I actually ran things by one of my friends who's in a rabbinical studies program and two people who lived in Israel to make sure that my arguments were sound. A lot of modern day arguments for demons that come from modern Jewish folks actually came from a period of time in which Christianity influenced that thought. And I give scholarly evidence for that. That video has 15 citations of different scholarly articles. So if you're interested in it, go check that out over on my channel. It's under the Pissed Off Polytheist series. Do Pagans Worship Demons is the name of the video.
Yeah, well, go and check that out, guys. definitely for sure. What do you say we jump into an after party? Because this sounds like we're getting into. I think we're getting into the topics that I'd love to hear more opinions on as well. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I think that'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I do too. And thanks for joining me tonight. It was a lot of fun chatting with you.
Thank you so much for finally getting me scheduled, because we were trying to get
I know. We've been talking for so long. Yeah, I know.
Well, you were things were up in the air for a while for scheduling, and then you forgot to get back to me, and then we were talking about it, and then you forgot to get back to me, and then Jen kicked your butt. So
I was like, yeah. I'm like, okay.
I love Jen. She is one of my closest friends in the community. She is so protective and wonderful and hilarious, and I hope she can make it to the after party tonight. That'd be amazing.
I'm sure she'll pop in for a little bit.
But again, thank you so much for inviting me.
I'm sorry that your stomach hurts, Wonder Lady. I hope you feel better. Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Allie. I mean, I've been looking forward to this once we actually were able to schedule it. My fault, kids. My fault. I'll take 100% of responsibility of that one. It's tough for me because I have people scheduled into October now. So, I mean, I some pretty interesting people coming up too, which is kind of cool. I think one of the ones I'm really excited to talk to is Cybabe. Are you familiar with Cybabe?
Mm-mm.
She's great science communicator, funny as hell.
I'll have to go look up her stuff, because I love science communication channels. Like I if you go to my private freaking YouTube account, like I have so many subscriptions to like science YouTube channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too. There's a few that we could talk about anyways, but yeah.
So before we close out, by the way, we've got about like 55 people chilling in the chat, and we've only got 41 likes. There are 14 of you that I'm silently judging.
Well, I highly doubt some of them are going to hit that like button, like Otangelo. He probably won't.
Hey, the algorithm don't care if it's the dislike button. Just hit one of them.
Yeah, it's okay. You can dislike this. Not everyone's going to like what I do, right? And I don't expect everyone to like what I do.
How could anybody dislike Hippie Daddy? Like, how could anybody dislike you? You were like the best person.
My dad always just say, you can't please 100% of the people 100% of the time, so don't even try. And I was like, okay, I got it. And I don't try. I do what I do, and if you dig it, you dig it. If you don't, you don't. But if you do dig it, there are ways you can help the channel. I have some links down below that you can check it out. I also have links down below for Aliakai, and so you can follow her on Twitter, and you can go to her channel. And she's got some great content on there, like the Zinnia Bridges that I was a guest on, and a lot of other really good content. She talks a lot about polytheism, a lot about community, advocation for community and stuff like that, or advocate for community. So yeah, definitely go and check it out. I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. We will be having more conversations just like this in the after party, and I'm sure some cool stuff will be brought up, because we're going to have people in there like my very good friend Ocean Keltoy will be in there, I'm sure. Hey, Jim Barrow, what's up? Probably my producer Mikey will be there. I'm sure that Frustrated Atheist, I saw that, by the way, Russ, I saw that, and we'll be in there as well. So there's going to be a lot of different brains and different angles on the stuff that we've been talking about tonight. So be sure to tune into that. The link is in the description below for the after party. So I hope to see you guys there afterwards. It should be a lot of fun. If you're interested in joining in the after party, you can get a hold of me through Twitter or Facebook and let me know, and I'll give you a link and you can join us. We now have the ability on, you gave a like? Thanks, Atangelo. I appreciate that. You and I may not agree on stuff, but I appreciate stuff like that. And you're still a human being, so I respect that part of you. Anywho, until next time, guys. What was I saying? Oh, yeah. If you want to be on the show, let me know, and I will send you a link, and you can jump in there. Until next time, guys, with this whole COVID thing going on right now, remember to be safe and be well, and above all, be kind to one another, because that's important.
Yeah, I had COVID. Y'all don't fucking want it. Wear your goddamn mask.
Yeah, it's not fun. I have not had it yet, luckily. Until next time. Wait, I already said that. And I already said part 1 of that. Part 2 is, like the late, great Christopher Hitchens once said, and I say this at the end of all my shows, so don't be offended, Allie. It's called faith.